The sun bled low over Coyote Bend, painting the fences and far mesas with fire. Dust coiled through the air like old ghosts, curling around the boots of those who still walked the lonely road at dusk. In that hush between day and dark, the desert seemed to breathe, slow, patient, ancient, as if waiting for something to happen. And down that road walked Najoni Blackbird, aged 20, her bare feet brushing against the red earth that had raised her. She carried a pail and a rag, the smell of lye still clinging to her hands. Behind her, the town of Coyote Bend was fading into amber distance, the windows of its whitewashed houses blinking with supper light. She had spent the day scrubbing other people's floors, floors that whispered her name only when her back was turned. That Navajo girl, they called her. That quiet one who works too hard for too little. Najoni didn't mind the work. What stung was the way their eyes skipped over her face, as though she were part of the dust itself. She kept her gaze down, the way her mother once told her. "Look too long at sorrow and it starts to recognize you," her mother had said. But some nights, when the wind grew soft and the world forgot to judge, she lifted her eyes to the horizon and let herself hope. That night she passed the old Boone Ranch, a wide stretch of land edged by dying cottonwood. People said the man who owned it never smiled, not since the fever took his wife 2 winters ago. They said wealth couldn't buy back the dead. As she walked past, she felt eyes on her. When she looked up, a tall man stood near the paddock fence, his shape framed by the lowering sun. Calder Boone, age 30, watched the woman cross the field like something the desert itself had shaped. He had been out feeding the horses, a habit done more from muscle than will. His life had long become a circle of chores, mending fences, feeding stock, counting what was left instead of what was gone. But the sight of her, small, steady, carrying her pail as though it were a crown, broke the day's monotony in a way that unsettled him. He had seen her before, of course. Everyone in town had. The girl who cleaned Mrs. Weller's house. The one others pitted and whispered about. But from where Calder stood, her stillness didn't look like shame. It looked like strength learned the hard way. When she drew near the fence, he called out softly, "Ma'am, it's a long walk to town. Would you like a drink of water before you go on?" Najoni hesitated, her fingers tightening around the pail. "I don't want trouble," she said. "Only water here," he replied, lifting a tin cup from the well's edge. She stepped closer, took it from him. Their fingers brushed, brief, accidental, but enough to set something trembling in the quiet. She drank, eyes lowered, and said, "Thank you, Mr. Boone." "Calder," he corrected gently. She nodded, not trusting the sound of his name on her tongue. "People will talk." "They already do," he said. "Might as well give them something kind to say." Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then she turned away, the sound of her footsteps fading into dusk. For the next few days, Calder found himself looking for her without meaning to. When he rode into town for feed, he'd slow near Mrs. Weller's place. Once, he saw her sweeping the porch, her dark braid glinting in the sunlight. She didn't see him that time. But when he tipped his hat, she paused, just for a moment, and he thought he saw her shoulders ease. In Coyote Bend, small gestures became rumors before nightfall. By the week's end, tongues wagged. Mrs. Weller's friends whispered that Calder Boone had lost more than his mind to grief, that now he was inviting Indians to drink from his well. The laughter was sharp, brittle. Najoni heard it all, as she always did, and said nothing. But that night, as she walked home, she found the same tin cup resting on the fence post near the well. Inside it lay a folded scrap of paper. "Thank you for the company," it read. "The horses like your song." She hadn't realized he'd been listening that evening. She hummed. The thought made her heart tremble in a way she didn't know how to name. Days stretched into weeks. Calder began leaving small things near the fence. A loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, a handful of wildflowers, a broken pocket watch he said no one else could fix. She mended it, careful and slow, the way she mended everything in her life, with quiet precision, with love she would never call love. When she returned it, the watch ticked again. He smiled for the first time in years. Sometimes they talked through the fence. He told her about the wife he'd buried under the sycamore hill, about how the silence afterward had become a companion he didn't know how to send away. She listened. She told him about her mother's songs, about how the desert could be both cruel and kind in the same breath. The world forgets beauty that doesn't beg to be seen, he told her once. Then maybe I'll stay hidden a while longer, she said, half smiling. Each evening ended the same way, a long look, an almost goodbye. And each night she lay awake wondering why she felt less invisible. But Coyote Bend was not kind to stories like theirs. One late afternoon, as she passed near the saloon, two ranch hands stopped her on the road. Their laughter was sour. "Heard you've caught yourself a rich man's eye," one sneered. "What's your price, girl?" Najoni froze. She clutched her shawl tighter, wishing to melt into the dust. But before she could speak, a shadow fell over them. Calder stood there, calm and still as thunder waiting to strike. "That's my wife you're talking about," he said quietly. The words dropped heavy into the air. The men stumbled back, muttering apologies, their courage draining fast. They left the road empty. Najoni stared at Calder, heart pounding. "Your wife," she whispered once they were alone. He met her eyes. "Not yet," he said, voice steady. "But I aim to make it true." She couldn't breathe. The desert felt too wide, the sky too close. "You shouldn't say that. They'll turn on you." "They already did," he said. "Didn't change the weather much." That night she didn't sleep. She thought of his hands, the calluses and gentleness in them. She thought of her name, spoken without mockery. By dawn, she had decided something she didn't fully understand. She went to his ranch as the morning light crept gold across the field. He was there, mending a fence post, sleeves rolled, the quiet weight of him like comfort itself. "I brought your watch back again," she said. "It stopped in the night." He took it, turned it over, then set it on the rail. "Maybe it just wanted to rest a while." His voice softened. "You didn't have to come. I wanted to." For a while they stood in silence. The world around them slowed, horses chewing, wind sighing through dry grass. Then Calder spoke. "I don't have much left that isn't marked by ghosts," he said. "But I'd give what's left to someone who knows how to make things live again." Her throat ached. "I don't know if I can." He looked at her, eyes gentle. "You already do." When he reached out, he didn't touch her face or hands, only her sleeve, the edge of her world. It was enough to undo them both. By the next Sunday, whispers had turned into silence. They married in the small wooden church at the edge of town. Reverend Clay spoke the words slowly, as though the air itself needed convincing. Only a handful came, mostly to see if it would truly happen. Najoni wore a plain dress of faded white cotton, one she'd stitched herself. Calder wore his father's old suit, smelling faintly of cedar. When he took her hand, his eyes shone wet. "You're all I need," he said, voice breaking. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The desert wind rushed through the open door, lifting her veil and carrying her mother's song through the rafters. The first drop of rain fell then, darkening the church step. Another followed. Soon the roof rattled with a storm that seemed to come from nowhere, the first rain Coyote Bend had seen in months. Outside, the dust turned to mud, the world softening under the sound. Inside, Calder kissed her hand, and Najoni, for the first time in her life, didn't lower her gaze. Afterward, they rode back to the ranch, rain streaking their faces, laughter breaking free like sunlight. Days passed, and the town that had once turned from them began to nod instead of whisper. Calder rebuilt the porch with her beside him. She planted sage by the windows. When she laughed, the horses lifted their heads, listening. The watch ticked steady on the table, its rhythm matching the pulse of the house. Years slipped by like that, quiet and golden. When storms came, they faced them together. When the world forgot them, they remembered each other twice as hard. One evening, long after the rain had become a memory, Najoni sat on the porch while Calder tuned his guitar. She watched the sun fade, the same way it had on that first night. "Do you ever miss the man you were before?" she asked. He smiled faintly. Only on days when the silence feels empty instead of full. She leaned her head against his shoulder. You filled mine too. The desert stretched before them, endless and forgiving. Time moved. One day, Calder's hair turned silver, his laughter slower. And one night, he fell asleep beside her and did not wake. She buried him under the same sycamore hill where his first wife rested. She sang him a song older than both of them, her voice breaking but steady. Years later, when strangers passed through Coyote Bend, they sometimes saw an old Navajo woman tending a ranch half swallowed by wild sage. She would smile, offer them water from the same well. Some said she spoke to the wind as if it listened. Some said, when the sun dipped low, they could hear her humming a tune the desert seemed to echo. And sometimes, if you stood quiet enough, you might catch her whispering. Once, I thought beauty was what others decided for you. But the desert taught me, it's what survives the storm. Calder saw me when I could not see myself. When he said, "You're all I need," he meant it, not as promise but as truth. If you ever feel unchosen, remember, love finds you in the dust, and turns it holy. The wind would rise, carrying her words across the red fields where dust and sunlight met, until everything shimmered with a kind of quiet grace. And then, as the night settled over Coyote Bend, the desert would breathe again, slow, patient, eternal, waiting for the next story to begin.